Xiphos Moonlight is a limited 4-star weapon that could be obtained from the Paddle and Literal Crit Rate Simulator banner. At level 90, it gives a low 510 attack and respectable 165 EM. And whenever you see an EM weapon, the question that should come to mind is, how good is it on Kazuha? The answer is, it's absolutely cracked on him, as it gives him as much EM as Ugly Sting, while also granting him a decent amount of recharge. Which brings us to our next point. Moonlight's effect basically scales EM into recharge. Meaning if you had ideally 1000 Mastery on Kazuha, it will grant you 36% extra recharge at R1, and at R5, it will give a massive 72% recharge. And additionally, it will grant your teammates 30% of whatever Bazubar gets. Let's go ahead and open the spreadsheet of knowledge to see exactly how the math works. Before that though, let's talk about Kazuha and why 1000 Mastery is ideal. Kazuha's second passive converts his EM into elemental damage bonus, correlating with whatever element he swirls with his E by 0.04%, meaning if you had 1000 EM, he would grant an additional 40% elemental damage boost to your team. And getting 1000 EM is easier than ever now on Kazuha. Don't trust me? Here. The sword itself gives 165 EM, and EM Hourglass maxes out at 186.5 at level 20. You might be asking, where the 0.5 comes from? And this can be found on the
Genshin Impact
wiki. I added it here because it would be important later when it comes to totaling everything up, since Genshin does round when it comes to calculating stats. Just like the Hourglass, the Cup and Hat also max at 186.5 EM each. If we total this together, it gives us 724.5 EM from just 3 artifacts in the weapon. Additionally, if your Bazuha is at least level 80 ascended, he gains 115.2 EM from his Ascension stat. If we add that to our previous total, we get 839.7 EM. By this point, you might be thinking, that's not 1000 EM, you still need an extra 160 to make it so, and if Flower and Feather EM substats are RNG. And you'd be absolutely correct. However, with 3.0, they introduced our second EM artifact set in Gilded Dreams. And if you've been playing long enough, chances are, I don't know, you'll maybe have at least 2 Wanderer's Troops pieces laying around. Both 2-piece set bonuses grant an additional 80 EM each. And hey, would you look at that? 80 plus 80 is 160, and 160 plus 839.7 is 1000 rounded up, which the game does for us. So if you were unlucky, you wouldn't even need Mastery from Substat RNG, if you got at least 3 main stat EM pieces on either Gilded or Wanderers to reach 1000 Mastery. And this still leaves room for 1 off piece. However, I do know more is better when it comes to EM on Babuzar for buffing's sake. But if you're content with 1000 EM, this allows you a lot more flexibility to focus on other important substats like attack, crit, or recharge. Speaking of recharge, let's go ahead and figure out exactly why this weapon's so good. So earlier, I briefly talked about the recharge passive of the weapon, and here we'll do some more math. In this situation, I'll be using my own Hakuza. In this situation, I'll be using my own Hazuka's stats instead of the hypothetical 0 EM and Flower to give a more realistic approach to an actual build. So that means I'll be having 84 on the Feather and 79 on the Flower, giving us a total of 1002.7 EM, since I don't actually have a build with 1000 EM and 0 recharge. With this, the 0.036% EM to ER passive grants us an additional 36 recharge onto his pre-existing 135 from my build, giving him a total of 171 recharge. Let's go ahead and check, yes, that is indeed correct. Now for how much it should give to a teammate. Since he gained 36% recharge, an ally should receive 30% of that, which would be 10.82% recharge. And added onto a character with no recharging weapons, substats, or ascension stats, it should become 110.82% recharge. And yes, that is indeed correct. Now let's go ahead and test the weapon in action to see how much EM you get back. And we'll do it in Abyss because that's honestly the only content worth trying it in. As you can see, he got back about 50% of his Q after 1 charged E, so it's not too bad considering the build only had 35% recharge from substats. So now that we know how to get 1000 EM and how the EM recharge conversion works, let's go over some pros and cons of the weapon. Starting with the cons, the biggest one is that it is a limited 4-star weapon, which shouldn't exist by the way. But rant aside, this makes it a lot harder to get since you can only pull it from the scam banner. 2, the base attack is pretty low for a 4-star. But it's not the worst thing in the world since things like Chad and Double Pyro easily offset attack stats. Speaking of attack, I've seen a lot of people tell others not to level Bazuhar's autos, calling it useless, and to that, I have to ask, are you on stupid juice? His E plunge multiplier is tied to his autos, and it only does, I don't know, a lot of damage because of its first passive. So yeah, that's some pretty yikes advice. And 3, the aesthetic is not 100% great on Kazuha. Yes, it's greenish like Anemo, but the regional aesthetic is a Sumeru South Asian Middle Eastern style weapon rather than a Japanese sword of Inazuma. The only way this could look really good on him is if you had C6 Bazuha, cause infusion's hot. Those are the only cons, let's go into the pros. 1. It gives the second most amount of EM in a sword, tied only with Ugly Sting, except the passive is infinitely better for utility than Stings. 2. While it does lose the Freedom Sworn in terms of EM and passive compatibility, it looks infinitely better drip-wise than Freedom Sworn on him. Like whoever looked at a blatantly Mondstadt German weapon and decided it should be a goddamn samurai's signature weapon needs to spend some time in the happy chair. 3. Given its recharging nature, it should be compared to Sack and Favonius at least. At R4, Moonlight gives 0.063% bonus, and going off of the 1000 EM precedent, this would grant him 63% recharge, which exceeds both Favonius and Sack's 61.3%. Granted, it is a limited weapon, while the other two are not. However, it would give more recharging capabilities to teams, so it edges over them there too. However, part 2, I hear you, Favonius gives particles to team as well. But remember, this is a guy you're building EM on, and since Favonius gives 0 EM of its own, what are the odds you even have enough crit rate to make those particles? I don't know, I don't think I will. One thing I'll give to Sack is that I'll grant him more damage since he'll have 2 charges of E that way, but it's way uglier than him. So Moonlight wins. And finally, the last pro is that Moonlight is probably the best of both worlds when it comes to a weapon for Barzuba, as it gives him the 2 things he needs most, EM and recharge, all while helping with Q building for team as well. This marries Favonius and Sack's strong points of Ugly Sting's only reason to exist, all while providing a buff that Freedom Sworn can't. And let's be real, Freedom Sworn's extra attack passive aspect is really easily compensated for, with the aforementioned Bennett and double pyro blah blah blah, and plenty of other ways, while recharging for a team as a buff is a lot rarer. Alright, that's it. I hope you enjoyed. I'll make another video in like 8 months. Goodbye.